This is the fourth part of the series. So my name is Kat Moncrief. I'm from SciWem and I'm going to be chairing today's webinar. So this, as I said, is the fourth webinar in the Project Spring series. And today we're going to be focusing on climate resilient gardens as a kind of component towards smart communities. And we're going to be sharing findings from public research and also discussions with developers looking into the viability of an accreditation scheme for climate resilient gardens. So as I said, I'm from SciWem. We're hosting today's webinar and we lead the communications and engagement part of the Enabling Water Smart Communities project. SciWem is the Chartered Institute of Water and Environmental Management, and we're a Royal Chartered professional body and independent charity. Before I go into the webinar, I just want to do some housekeeping stuff. So Nathan, if you could just move on to the next screen, that would be brilliant. So these are just kind of housekeeping rules, really. So it's going to be recorded. If you've got any objections to this being made public, then please do let us know. If you experience any technical issues during the webinar and need assistance, please raise your hand and use the chat feature on the Zoom to let us know what's going on. We're going to take your questions at the end of the presentations. So if you've got a question or comment about the content of the presentations, then please put those into the Q&A facility on Zoom. So there's sort of two different features there. There's the chat feature for technical issues and then the Q&A feature for your questions. Okay. So I'm joined today, very happy to be joined today by colleagues on the Enabling Water Smart Community project. So Joe Grisaffi from Anglian Water, who's Sustainable Growth Co-ordinator, and also George Warren, also from Anglian Water, who's Integrated Water Management Manager. And they're going to take you through the work they've been doing on climate resilient gardens. But before that, I'm just going to give a very brief introduction to the Enabling Water Smart Communities project. And I'm sure many of you on the call have heard this before, but just a quick intro for those that don't know too much about the project will just be a few minutes. So next slide, please. And I think we can go on to the next. Yeah, that's brilliant, the one with the partners on. So Enabling Water Smart Communities is an innovation project that's looking at the relationship between integrated water management, community practices and housing development. And it's aiming to unlock opportunities for delivering water smart communities and ensuring long-term water stewardship. The project is funded through the Transform stream of the Ofwat Innovation Fund. And you can see we've got many different delivery partners involved, including water companies. So we've got Anglian Water here today, but also academic and research institutions. We've got Waterwise, Public First, and the Community Land Trust. And we've also got a number of different bodies involved in the Independent Programme Board, which helps guide the project. And as you can see, that's made up of some developer organisations and also relevant government bodies. Next slide, please. So before we get into the detail of the work today, what do we mean by a water smart community? So it's essentially where water-related assets and systems, such as rainwater harvesting and sustainable drainage systems, are included at the design stage and built into the fabric of a place. But it's also about the software. So it's about the members of that community understanding, valuing and taking ownership for those assets and systems so that we can enhance the value of water and cultivate more sustainable water use. So on to the next slide, please. Where's the impetus for this project come from? So the project is really about addressing the shared issues faced by the water and housing sectors, and they're illustrated by the news articles on this slide. So these issues include water scarcity. So many of you will know that we're facing a 4.8 billion litre day deficit in water by 2050 if we don't do anything. And as climate change bites, the risk of flooding is also rising. And in other areas, we've got a lack of sewer capacity, which is causing issues in terms of sewer overflows and pollution if we add more houses onto that sewer network. So there are a number of different issues faced by the water and housing sector, and this project is looking to overcome those issues in a holistic and integrated way. And specifically, we're trying to mainstream those water smart approaches, such as water reuse, rainwater harvesting, and sustainable drainage into all new housing developments and ultimately unlock sustainable growth. Next slide, please. So through the initial discovery phase of enabling water smart communities, we reviewed a number of case studies, looked at, undertook some interviews, wrote some articles, and explored the various perspectives and challenges around water smart communities. And many of that background research is captured in articles on the medium space on our website. This phase also identified blockers associated with developing and adopting water smart communities and what needs to happen to overcome or remove those blockers. And we called those things enabling actions for water smart communities. So this slide here shows some of those enabling actions that we're working on. And today we're focused on the concept of climate resilient gardens. So you can see that's an enabling action in the bottom right-hand corner. And that piece of work is looking at how we might be able to mainstream this concept of climate resilient gardens. So I'm going to hand over to George first and then Joe to dive into that work.
Thanks very much, Kat. Thank you. Hopefully everybody can hear me. Kat, would you be able to put yourself on mute? There's a bit of a feedback. Thank you. Hopefully that's no longer feeding back to others and that you can hear me okay. So as Kat introduced the project and ourselves, I'm George Warren. I'm the Integrated Water Manager at Anglian. And I'm going to hopefully take you initially through why on earth we would want to be looking at this. So can we have the next slide, please? Now, please excuse me, because I do not read any of the newspapers that are quoted here, but I'm very aware through various social media posts and other routes that there are a number of cases where people are complaining of the quality of their gardens within new build properties. And a lot of the time it's linked to poor drainage and these underlying soil conditions that these gardens have been placed on. Now, I don't think anyone necessarily wants to hear this stuff, or as in would like for this to occur. Not only are we finding that they're having extreme drainage issues, but we're actually, if we go to the next slide, we've also got issues when it comes to from a water perspective. So we're seeing more and often than not situations where gardens are either becoming bogs in the winter months or are as dry as a bone during the summer, leading to inaccessibility ostensibly. What I've tried to show here on the right-hand side is quite the degree of which water usage increases dramatically over the summer months, sort of 20 to 30% increases, a lot of which can be assigned to increases in domestic irrigation, sadly. What we would like to do is get to a point where these gardens not only are accessible during the winter, but also can continue to live through the summer months without requiring huge demands on the public water supply, which is under significant pressure. Which is why, as water companies, we're interested in this. Could I have the next slide, please? The problem that we quite often see is that the response to coming across gardens where they're bogged during the winter and dry as a bone during the summer is that people either A, pave over them, which causes significant issues when it comes to surface water management and the potential for flooding downstream, and as well as increased flows into the sewer system, or B, put in artificial turf. I'm hoping I'm amongst friends in this call, and that I don't think either of those options are the ones that we want to see going forward. One leads to, well, both of which can lead to significant surface water flows, and the latter one that could potentially be causing a problem even further down the road when it comes to microplastics and the likes. So next slide, please. So we asked ourselves some questions, I suppose, around how could we potentially encourage new builds to create gardens that are usable all year round and fit for the future? How can we help to reduce that surface water that flows off of private gardens potentially, and reduce their irrigation demands as well? What do new purchasers actually want from a garden? It's quite incredible the number of times, if you were to go to look at brochures of new housing developments, the lack of detail surrounding the garden space. I struggled to find a single photo of garden spaces within new build properties. I'm sure people will probably place some in the chat if they're from the development industry and do so, but they are few and far between. And yet that's a quite large proportion of the property. And certainly and Joe will go on to explain on our survey is showing that actually the garden place is quite a large element of a new build, and I guess ranks quite highly in terms of how important it is to people, and yet very little detail on it. So what do people actually want from those gardens would be a really good question to be asking. And then if we were to create a climate resilient garden, is there a willingness to pay potentially more for that, a premium for such things in the interim time? And would developers potentially be interested in delivering such things? And we have focused in at the beginning on the potential for an accreditation scheme to encourage such. So I think I'm going to be handing now over to Joe, who's going to run through a piece of work that we did looking at what the public's perception towards such things are. So I shall put myself on mute and I shall be speaking to you in a bit.
Thank you, George. So hello everybody. My name is Jo Grisaffi, obviously working on the Climate Resilient Gardens project. So today I'm just going to be sharing some of the insights from the research that we conducted with 56 Degree Insights on the concept of the climate resilient gardens. This research was really important for us to understand, like George said, the public perceptions and preferences when purchasing a new build, and to help us guide our efforts to promote the Climate Resilient Gardens project. Next slide, please. So this research focused solely on individuals who are likely to purchase a new build home in the near future, or have recently purchased one, and we did all this back in January of this year. So between the 13th and 20th of January, we interviewed a total of 553 people. So this included 236 people who had purchased a new build home in the last 2 years, and 317 people who expect to be purchasing a new build over the next year. So overall, we asked around 30 questions, I think it was, but I have just pulled out some of the key points that I think are most relevant for this. So next slide, please. So I know this one's a little bit hard to see, so I will kind of focus in a little bit on the next slide. But firstly, one of the questions that we asked the respondents is to what extent they agree or disagree with these following statements related to garden access, climate change resilience, and other environmental factors on there. As you can see, if you can squint and look there, you can see that the majority of respondents did agree with a lot of the statements about the benefits of garden access for mental and physical well-being, the importance of biodiversity, and the need for climate change resilience. So if you can just go on to the next one, please. So on this slide, this is the one that I pulled out from the previous slide, just some of the more notable statements on there. As you can see, the research revealed really high levels of agreement on the importance of gardens for biodiversity and the need for adaptation to climate change. The respondents emphasised the importance of actions to minimise environmental impact and expressed concerns about the impacts of climate change on biodiversity and personal health. So as you can see, the majority, over 80% of people agreed on each of these points. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we also asked how important environmental sustainability is when choosing a new home. And you can see here that the results show that it's a significant factor for many respondents. The data shows that overall 82% of respondents consider it to be extremely or very important when looking at buying a new home. 14% moderately important, and the lower percentages not at all important. But overall, 96% of people we asked considered this to be one of the most important things that they look for when choosing a new home, which we found to be fairly surprising, really, with all things considered. When you think about schools that are local, a lot of people consider that, or parks and things like that. But no, environmental sustainability is a really big factor in that one. Next slide, please. So on this one, we were kind of exploring the idea of personalising a garden, like you would be able to if you buy a new build home, when you personalise a kitchen or a bathroom. So we wanted to find out people's viewpoints of doing the same thing with a garden, and the potential budget that they would be willing to spend on doing something like that. The results indicate that 70% of people are definitely interested, as you can see on the left there. And of those 70% of people, on the right-hand side, you can see that quite a few people are willing to pay extra towards that. So 97% in total would be willing to pay between £2,000 to £10,000 extra when purchasing a new build home and having the opportunity to personalise your garden. Next slide, please. Another quite a lot of data on this one as well. I'll just try and run through the most important parts here. So one of the questions that we asked was, what was the most important garden feature that you would look for when you're buying a new build home? And so all of these options, we included things like biodiversity, space, soils, climate resilience, and the ability to personalise garden again to suit preferences. But we found that the number one preference out of the people that we asked when choosing gardens would be to have good quality and healthy soil to grow in. With that has 38%, which is significantly more than the rest of the options there. Also closely followed by things like good drainage, wildlife friendly features, and having a low maintenance space that is good for enjoying, which seemed to be more popular amongst older respondents. We do have a report that breaks down kind of who responded to what questions, so we can see things like age, location. So that was useful when we're looking at the data. But yeah, good quality and healthy soil to grow in was also quite surprising to us when you see the other options on there, but also really encouraging to see that people are really thinking about gardens. Next slide, please. So we then wanted to get opinions on the idea of having a specific Royal Horticultural Society accredited garden and the concept of that. As you'll see from the following slides, we found that most people found this concept to be really appealing, and we think it's probably due to the nature of the RHS and the loyalty that the customers have to that brand. But yeah, focus on sustainability, ease of maintenance, and resilience to climate change were other things that came up when asking about the RHS. So next slide, please. So there's just a small paragraph there just to give an idea of the RHS. I'm sure a lot of you here already know what the RHS is, and I don't need to read that out for you. But we wanted to get people's idea of if this would be appealing. So based on recent experiences buying or searching for a new home, we asked respondents to tell us if they would be interested in the inclusion of something specific like an RHS climate resilient garden scheme. And as you can see here again, a lot of people found it extremely appealing. Over 51% of people found it extremely appealing, with 38% of people finding it quite appealing, and neither appealing or not appealing, much lower figures as it goes down. So yeah, I think that it's a lot of people, over 89% there, finding it either quite or extremely appealing. Again, quite encouraging. Next slide, please. So we wanted to know how willing customers would be to pay a premium for the climate resilient garden in a new home. Data here shows that 38% of respondents will pay significantly more, so over £10,000 people would be willing to pay. We found that these numbers were higher from respondents in places like London, potentially because they either don't have the space outside or because they tend to have a bigger wage than people elsewhere. But yeah, it's really high percentages again that would want to pay moderately more, so over £5,000. And overall, 96% of people saying they would want to pay between £2,000 to £10,000 for this kind of garden in their home. Next slide, please. So throughout the survey, there were just opportunities for respondents to provide reasons for the appeal of the climate resilient garden scheme. So we've just pulled out some comments here from the feedback. So this includes things like the ease of maintenance, sustainability, the ability to withstand floods and water scarcity. But we did have a list after this survey of over 300 comments that were all in support of this kind of scheme. So yeah, I think we feel that the findings really highlight the importance of sustainability when choosing a new home. And there's obviously a significant willingness to pay premium for a climate resilient garden. And yeah, it's clear that it's something that resonates really strongly with people who are looking to buy new homes in the future.
Thanks, Jo. Thank you. I should just add that although the RHS were involved in helping to curate some of the questions and reviewing it, it by no means have the RHS agreed to be part of any creation of an accreditation scheme at this point in time. But we just wanted to use the RHS as a suggestion of a route that it may be applicable and appropriate. And it certainly seemed as though the alignment of an accreditation scheme with the RHS brand was seen in a favourable manner by those respondents. So thank you, Jo, for going through that. And I think somebody asked on the chat whether the report, the findings will be made available. We plan to publish the findings on our website in due course. We're just trying to pull everything together and to publish it. So I'll go on to this section, which is about our developer workshop, if I may. And then once we've done that, I will and finalise the findings from this. We will then be publishing it all on the webpage. So yeah, after having undertaken some public survey, we then set about trying to pull together a workshop at Beth Chatto Gardens in Colchester to discuss with a number of members of the development industry as to the applicability here. So can I have the next slide, please, Nathan? So yeah, Anglian Water in collaboration with Davies White, Landscape Architects, we hosted a one-day workshop at Beth Chatto to explore the role of resilient gardens and sustainable landscapes in new housing developments. The event convened leading figures from the landscape architecture, water management and planning to share insights and generate ideas for climate resilient, biodiverse and water-wise outdoor spaces. So the day combined presentations from expert speakers including Julia Bolton, Ariel Anderson, George Hudson, Dr. Wei Yang, Marion Boswell and Andre and Adam from Davies White. And we also had a site visit to Chatto Wood, a stone's throw from Beth Chatto Gardens actually, where certain climate resilient planting had taken place as part of that development. And then was followed by some interactive sessions designed to spark discussion and creativity around this. Can I have the next slide, please? So a central theme of the day was the potential for development of a resilient gardens landscape accreditation reward scheme, potentially a new accreditation scheme that looks to recognise excellence in residential green infrastructure. Workshop participants explored this concept, acknowledging the value of a clear, independent standard for resilient climate adaptive design. Can I go to the next slide, please? So I'll talk through the interactive session there, please. So the interactive session began with a facilitated group discussion exploring the shared ambitions for change across the industry. Participants reflected on what good could look like and why transformation is necessary. Working in small teams, they used a curated set of images to create mood boards and helped visualize a more inspiring and sustainable future. Key insights from each group were then shared with the wider room to shape the collective understanding. So when we speak about rich and varied planting, this is talking about the use of diverse naturalistic planting with year-round interest and edibles to support nature and beauty. Then there's a talk about prioritizing soil quality, phased planting, and simple guidance for residents to help plants thrive. The quality of over quantity. So this was focused on well-designed, innovative spaces rather than just size. So challenging the business as usual approach, I guess, to this. And these were all sort of shared ambitions that came forth. Rather than going through them all, I think some of the ones to call out were around sort of acknowledging the fact that, you know, there will still remain a desire to have driveways and car dominating front gardens elements, and that will be even more so with the prevalence of EV charging infrastructure. And how do you try and align both elements? And then speaking about, you know, how we design around climate smart design, so design functional spaces that manage water and balance earthworks and respond to a local climate, as well as kind of the need around industry shift to encourage growers to offer variety and address supply, demand and risk in the housing landscape. There are a number of these, and the report will go through these in far more detail. Can I have the next slide, please? So the second part of the discussion focused on identifying what would drive meaningful change within the industry. So participants explored the mechanisms that could shift current practices, including whether an award scheme might serve as a catalyst for embracing best practice and raising standards across the sector. So here's some potential, I guess, changes that maybe need. So consistent standards, so clear, measurable regulations are needed to avoid conflicting or missing standards in garden design and delivery. A simple garden rating, for instance, like an EPC for gardens, could assess the quality based on soil, biodiversity, water management, drainage, and visual interest. Metrics that should be developed to demonstrate the environmental and financial value of green infrastructure, such as reduced water runoff and improved soil health, to give it some measurable value. And then there's stuff around public awareness, making people more aware of things, and the alignment with trusted voices, like the RHS that was called out earlier. Stuff around the quality at handover. So gardens should be properly finished before handover with good soil, planting, and features like swift boxes and hedgehog holes, where it was raised as a clear thing. And the fact that homeowners need practical advice to help them care for their gardens and maintain quality over time. Let's go on to the next slide, if I may. So having explored the potential to develop a resilient gardens accreditation, we then went on to looking at, well, I guess it was suggested that the concept could build on strengths of established models such as PIPA, which is the Plan of Inclusive Play Areas Award, or the Green Flag Awards, offering practical evidence-based frameworks for assessing landscape quality. I should add at this point that there are a number of other schemes that we were made aware of, but if anyone is particularly familiar with existing accreditation schemes that may well link into this nicely, please do let us know and engage with us on that, because we do not want to reinvent the wheel at all in this instance. So workshop participants also explored factors that would help support or challenge the success of such a scheme. These included the importance of clear messaging around developer and community benefits, the need for robust evidence-based criteria to ensure credibility, the value of respected partners in building trust and uptake, and the importance of flexibility to suit varying site conditions. The workshop then concluded with feedback and a creative badge design activity, symbolising the potential of the proposed award to inspire pride, quality and innovation in landscape design for housing. Here are three of the sort of the proposed badges that came out of those little workshops. If I can go on to the next slide, please. So while there was no definitive consensus, there was cautious interest in piloting the idea to further test feasibility, industry appetite and practical delivery. So interactive sessions demonstrated shared ambition for future development and identified key enablers to help achieve these. The potential to pilot the scheme could provide a valuable opportunity to test the assessment framework, gauge developer engagement, and refine the criteria in a real-world setting. It would also help demonstrate the broader value of resilient landscape design to communities, to the environment, and to the housing sector. While still at an early stage, there was broad interest in continuing to explore this idea. Taking forward a pilot would obviously support that by further consultation and co-design. It could offer a powerful next step in embedding resilience and play into future housing landscapes. And I think what our next plan is to do is to pull those findings together into a single report to publish on our website that includes the work that Joe described earlier. And then to present these findings to some key organisations to see if this could be taken further. Enabling water smart communities can only take it so far. We are just trying to build the foundations here of saying there looks to be a business case here to pursue it further. The intention isn't for it to become an enabling water smart communities accreditation of any kind. It is more to provide I guess the bones of why we may want to pursue this further. So I think that's where we'll probably bring it to an end in terms of our presentation. I think if there's a next slide, it probably goes on to questions, which I think has several pop up in the chat. So.
Thank you very much, George and Joe. I mean, there's some fascinating insights there, and particularly from the public survey. I mean, I've seen some of those results, but I think, yeah, they're really strong, aren't they? There's some really clear messages coming out. So yes, we've already had questions coming through on the Q&A, which is brilliant. So I will kick off with some of those. So there's a question here about the survey and the socioeconomic profile of respondents, for example, income band. Curious whether the results may have been influenced by that. So did we collect data on socioeconomic profile?
We did, yeah. So we do have the data in the full report. Like George said, we'll be sharing that later. But yeah, we did have, the survey went throughout the whole of the region, sorry, not just Anglian water region, but the whole of England. So where the respondents came from, we couldn't control, but we did get a good range throughout the whole of England, some from London, some from up north. So it probably did have an impact on the results, but we still feel that there was a fair spread throughout the region.
That's really good. And then Brian asks about mosquitoes and fire. So climate change often focuses on droughts and floods. Have mosquitoes and fire also been considered?
I'd say that they have, but it's a really interesting point, Brian. I think I can't say they have. I think it probably does go hand in hand with some of the climate resilient, proposals as part of that. So, is the presence of stagnant water would be one that you'd want to avoid if you're hoping to control mosquitoes in that respect, and fire. Evidently, the drying up of landscape and the potential for, I guess, the sparking of a fire in that respect. So I would imagine that they have, but not necessarily called out in that regard, and certainly not at this point in time. But it's an interesting point that we'll make note of, actually, Brian, to ask ourselves that question as we go forward on this.
And something that maybe links to thinking about the biodiversity as well, and creating the right sort of balance of ecosystem that can adapt with the climate.
In contrast to that, flooding also reduces the number of wasps. So, it's all a balance.
What would you prefer?
I mean, they're all important. I'm not going to comment on that.
Great. We've also had a couple of questions about retrofitting. So there was, yeah, was it a couple? Maybe there's just one, but from Naomi here, is there potential for the accreditation to apply to homeowners and landlords to retrofit or redesign existing gardens?
So we should be clear that one of the reasons we've only focused in on new build is that we had been really clear to keep within the scope of enabling more smart communities. And we had specifically said new build residential development. I see no reason why some of the standards couldn't be lifted and shifted into a retrofit sense. But I guess our theory here was that the driver would be at the point of construction, and the potential for an accreditation scheme, whether that is driven by local planning policy requirements for it, or I guess incentivized by water companies as part of the environmental incentive program, or even just as an incentive on the basis of the willingness to pay aspects of it. But I see no reason why some of the standards couldn't be lifted and shifted in that regard. In terms of if you wanted to make your garden more climate resilient, these are the sort of things that you may want to consider, and aspects that should be considered in that regard. But the intention hadn't been to necessarily look at creating for a retrofit sense on the basis that the accreditation would be one as an attraction for buyers in that respect.
Yeah.
I think my internet is playing up, so apologies if that came through a bit patchy.
Sounds okay to me.
Okay.
We've got a question here from Barbara Woods about connectivity. So was connectivity of gardens and green blue spaces considered at the workshop?
So one of the things that we've been constantly battling with is whether we wanted to look at private gardens, and whether we should only look at private gardens, or whether we should be looking at gardens in amongst the public realm aspects of the new development. Noting the fact that biodiversity net gain, for instance, does not include for private gardens. It only includes the public realm. And it felt as though there had been significant drivers for enhancements in the public realm side of the greening aspects, but not necessarily any concentration on what happens within the 3 fence lines. So there certainly was discussion, Barbara, in terms of the connectivity element, both in terms of biodiversity connectivity, but also noting the fact that if you're in close proximity to a large blue or green space, that there may be less desire for certain elements within garden space than if you weren't, for instance. I wouldn't say that we've necessarily, I mean, it's been discussed, but I wouldn't say there's been necessarily a decision made in that regard. And I think it's more of a note to add that actually there is an element of the location of these gardens and proximity to other infrastructure that needs to be considered. So it's not necessarily one size fits all approach, which makes standards quite tricky at times, and if that's the case.
Indeed. And I think that links to a question from Brian, who says, has any distinction been made between a vegetated SUDS, sustainable drainage system, where drainage or attenuation is a major element, and a resilient garden, where gardening is the main aim? So you've got 2 slightly different things there, haven't you? One in private space, one in public space. Slightly different focus, but obviously there's a huge amount of overlap. So I wonder whether, I think the question is kind of asking, did you delve into the distinction between those things?
But I think it's important to say that anything that you can do from a surface water management perspective within a private garden to help slow the flow ostensibly is going to be beneficial for the overarching SUDS design for that development. Noting that the more we can do to hold back the flow, the less flow will be transferring down, and I guess the reduction in attenuation volume that may be required as part of it. Also mindful those who have worked with me over the past couple of years will know that I've been really trying to push on water reuse and community scale water reuse side of things. So the more we're doing in terms of collecting and reusing water, rainwater for the irrigation, the less potential water is available for the flushing of toilets, for instance, that we would like to pursue. So I think we need to see it as part of a system. And certainly there has been, I would suggest that whether you want to classify it as being part of your SUDS design in private garden, or whether it is, a separate element of the SUDS design, I think the private garden has to form part of that function, as well as it does with regards to its water reuse strategy for the development. So I don't know if I'm answering your question particularly, but I think SUDS will form a very clear part of this climate resilient gardens approach, because ultimately it aligns quite nicely with it. The whole garden will not be a wet mess. We need to make sure we understand where the water flows, where we can infiltrate, where it's not appropriate, what plant species might be most appropriate for it, both in terms of enhancing evapotranspiration, but also noting the fact that actually in SUDS design, you're not necessarily planting plants to get wet roots. It's quite often a case of it being a free draining soil that actually requires it to survive better in drier conditions. So in many respects, it will probably align best. Sorry, Joe, I appreciate I've just dominated that answer. Is there anything you wanted to add on that?
No, nothing to add.
Question on the link with SUDS is kind of continuing with the questions here. So there's one which is asking, could opportunities in private gardens be able to take on the requirement for SUDS while we still wait for Schedule 3 of the Flood and Water Management Act? Could an accreditation scheme be part of recognised SUDS? Well, I know that there are some standards being developed for SUDS, so that in a way is sort of an accreditation scheme.
I think it always comes back to the ability to monitor and maintain those elements, and when they're sat within private gardens, I guess those responsible for ensuring the reduction in flood risk have limited accessibility to those private gardens, which then makes it quite hard to rely upon. I think if there is a way that we can ensure that such things, or at least reduce the risk of such things being ripped up or potentially paved over or not maintained in that regard, then I think they certainly should form part of it. I'd like to think we should all be doing our own little bit towards this and not just having to rely upon the necessary government bodies in that regard. I'm not sure I'm about to get into the Schedule 3 argument per se. One of the things that probably is worth flagging, though, is a piece of work that we're doing as part of Enabling More Smart Communities, looking at, and I think we've renamed it, but it was previously referring to it as the pond premium, whether there is, I guess, increased sales prices or increased sales rates for properties built adjacent to high quality blue-green infrastructure, and whether there is, I guess, evidence to suggest as such. We keep on hearing it in terms of anecdotal evidence, but we wanted to collate that and really see what, if any, evidence there might be on that front. I appreciate it's not referring to private gardens, but that may well be of interest to those asking those questions.
It would be really interesting, actually, to see the results of that. So that's also going to be doing a public survey. But it'd be interesting to see how whether the enthusiasm for kind of climate resilient gardens that we've seen come out through this survey translates into enthusiasm for green and blue infrastructure on the wider development. So yeah, really looking forward to that. And I think it could have quite important implications going forwards. So there's just on the thinking of kind of standards and accreditation scheme, we've got a question here from Andrew. potential considerations for new build gardens that could form an extension of building standards and regulations. So making sure that soil is of a certain standard with basic drainage considerations. Maybe that would remove the perceived need to pay a premium if there's already basic coverage to provide a foundation for a resilient garden.
An interesting one, actually. Yeah, almost. Yeah, I could see how that could drive similar sort of outcomes to the one we're trying to achieve, but for a different route. I think it's worth exploring as to what impact that may have when it comes to from a retrofit in particular side of things, but also, you know, it's basically stated, you know, that could be pulled into new build as well. I'm sorry, I'm seeing what you're saying in terms of, yeah, sorry, I'm rereading the question, and I'd read it wrong. So, but yeah, I can see how it could come into building standards and regs on that front. Now, I guess it's an alternative route to an accreditation in that regard. This is seen more as a voluntary accreditation, and to try and provide that, you know, appeal to developers to take it. This would be more of a stick route through regulation. Now, whether that would achieve everything we're trying to achieve from the climate resilient, or whether gardens, whether that would purely result in, I guess, less condensed soil. I guess it's probably more the latter than it is kind of all the other aspects that we would like to get out of it.
Yeah, certainly another potential route. And I was interested, George, in what you said about developer incentives, and you explored that at the workshop.
Yeah. So it may.
Where would that? Because I suppose the research suggests that people would be willing to pay for this. So therefore, is there a need for an incentive from the developer's perspective?
I mean, I would say if I was a developer on this call, and no, I'm not, but I would be going, there's a difference between people saying they're willing to pay and actually paying for it, and that market might dictate you know, the price of the property, and it doesn't. They don't. People don't necessarily know what the baseline is upon which you're building that additional 10,000. But there's obviously interest. I think the environmental incentive program could offer an incentive towards it. Could fund, for instance, the application for such an accreditation scheme. It could go a contribution towards the additional cost in order to deliver such things. Whether I don't think it's in the realms of being able to fund it in its entirety. I think, you know, when we've been looking at it, and there's another piece of work going on right now around environmental incentives and standardization around that as part of enabling more smart communities. So watch this space on that front too. But I think we could provide an incentive towards it.
And that's water company environmental incentives.
Yeah,
George.
Apologies.
Yeah.
So that's water company environmental incentives. This forms almost a reduction in infrastructure charges at a point of connection. So all water companies are required to provide an environmental incentive. They typically are around water efficiency and lowering water demand, and surface water management aspects. But there are abilities to put in bespoke elements depending on the company's particular interest. And this could easily be one on that basis. And it's something that we wanted to explore, whether we could remove a partial element of the barrier to such an accreditation scheme, if there were such one. I think I've seen a number of questions around why try to create a new accreditation if there are others out there.
Yeah, there is a question. Yeah. There's a couple of questions on that actually, which I was going to come back to. Yeah, so have you...
I don't think the intention is to create one if there's already ability to either amend an existing or, you know, or add it to, or maybe it's even already incorporated. I think what we would like to understand is if there is one already out there, what's the barrier to people taking it up? What role could water companies have in trying to incentivize such things? What role could local planning authorities have in trying to encourage such things? You know, and it wouldn't necessarily mean that, you know, that it has to be exactly this, but understanding what the minimum standard requirements are to be able to mirror those within policies. So, you know, please rest assured, we're not trying to reinvent the wheel and create a whole new, you know, industry here. I think if there is an applicable incentive already out there to amend, then let's have a look at that first and foremost. We were just working on the basis of there's drivers from all sides in creating this, and whether as a, you know, something like the RHS applying their premium brand to it, whether there is enough of an attraction from the development industry as well as the potential purchasers to warrant wanting to seek that accreditation.
George, and just looking in the chat, there is a point there from Brian on the pond premium, some evidence from New Zealand. So he says there is evidence of higher house prices where there is a view of water, but that was open water rather than blue-green features. And there's a good report from Auckland, New Zealand, that also considered social status of each housing area. So that sounds interesting, Brian. If you've got the link to that report, we'd love to see it, because the project is trying to look globally at different bits of research and case studies as well.
Yeah, Brian, please email it through to Kat, who will be leading on that piece of work. So,
I'm just seeing if there's anything else in the chat. There was something.
I just noticed something from Mark.
Yeah,
calling it climate resilient gardens and potentially limit the. It's a really hard one, and note that I think we started off with a water smart gardens accreditation and went for climate resilient, and I think there has to be a happy medium at some point as to not trying to be too narrow in its focus, but also not trying to be so wide that it kind of covers everything and therefore gets, excuse the pun, watered down. You know, there were elements within the Code for Sustainable Homes that may have encouraged such things, but you could get your points elsewhere, and therefore people didn't seek it out. Let's say, so by going so wide in that regard, actually you may not have the impact. But it's a really good point to make, and also mindful of the fact that there'll be other drivers out there that may well trump the water elements of this. So yeah, I think we're very mindful of it and not necessarily wedded to purely looking at climate resilience, but it feels like there's quite a lot to bite off in the climate resilience space, and you know, and there's a good driver for it. But yeah, welcome your input on that one.
Yeah, and linked to kind of definitions and naming, there was a question that came in before the webinar from Janet Manning. She asked, will the need for a definition of what constitutes a climate resilient garden be the thing that stops this happening? I really hope not.
I sincerely hope not, but I would tend to agree that just people agreeing on what constitutes that could be the longest period of the project if it were to go ahead. But then, yeah, maybe I think it can be addressed quite quickly, but it may not necessarily be exactly what everyone wants.
I think I'm more positive on that front with the EPC rating that's been discussed. I think maybe that would make the conversation a little bit easier to have specifications for how it should look.
There you go. Keep the positivity, Joe.
Yeah. So Joe, were you thinking that would be part of the EPC rating or something similar, something that would look similar?
So it won't actually be called an EPC rating. I don't know the name for it, but it would be the same as like an electric performance certificate for a house, but for your garden.
Yeah.
I don't know if that would feed in directly. I think it's something that's being looked into at the moment by the RHS as something they want to produce. So it's not there yet. So when it is, then it would definitely be taken into consideration alongside of this project.
Yeah. Oh, that would be fabulous to see something like that. Yeah. think we've got any more questions that have come through that I haven't addressed, but do shout if there is something that I've missed. There was another one that came through beforehand from Ollie. So this is one about hydraulic modelling. So do you have any experience in evidencing climate resilient gardens performance via hydraulic modelling? I think that sort of comes back to the SUDS conversation a little bit.
I think, and apologies if I've misinterpreted your question, Ollie, but I think this is effectively saying, what is the runoff coefficient essentially that you might apply to these climate resilient gardens, or what benefit could they have in terms of helping to slow the flow as part of your overall development and drainage design for that? And that, what would you apply in terms of hydraulic modelling to account for it? The short answer is probably no, we haven't. But it's a really interesting point to raise and could be a driver towards such things. In simple form, if you can help to incorporate, if you can reliably place a lower runoff coefficient associated with those, then actually there could be quite considerable benefits from an overarching site-wide drainage strategy doing so. And so I think we should look at how we might be able to incorporate that and reliable benefits in that regard. But we haven't necessarily explored it, and hopefully people have got the message here. This is very much in its infancy, and we're just starting the conversation really. And it's not necessarily for a group of water companies to necessarily come up with the solution in this. We're just trying to start the conversation as we think that's worth pursuing further.
Indeed. Great. Well, we've got a couple of minutes left, so I think we've probably run out of time for questions. We can just go to the next slide. I can just talk through the webinar series. So this is number 4 of 5 today. We've recorded them all, so we will be sharing them so you can look back on the earlier ones. So we had one around institutional collaboration to start with, and then a second one focused on community-based water stewardship. And then last week we looked at the water efficient home guide that we're developing with the Good Homes Alliance. That is being launched on the 10th of July. There's a launch event for that, so look at that one. And then today, climate resilient gardens. Not next week, sorry, we've got a break. The week after, we're going to be looking at public engagement around water smart communities, and that draws from a number of innovative case studies where communities in different places and focusing on different things have been engaged in water issues. And I think that will be really interesting, looking ahead to how we get communities and public really engaged in what we're doing. So look out for those. There's a QR code for the website there. So please go and delve into that. We've got all of our outputs and reports there, as well as if you go onto our Medium space, you can look at some of the initial research articles that we did. So I think just to close up, it would be great just to have 20 seconds from Joe and George on what you'd like the participants today to go away with this afternoon.
I would say, please let us know of any accreditation schemes that you feel as though this may align with or should be incorporated within.
Yeah, accreditation schemes, any developments that that are already looking into this, case studies, and feedback too would be great.
Yes, please do feedback, any further thoughts. Yeah, and thank you very much for your time, and I hope everyone has a lovely afternoon. Cheers then.
Thanks, Kat. Thanks, John.
Bye.